Welcome to Nightmare Fuel Stories, the silent broadcast. I've always been drawn to abandoned places. There's something about the emptiness, the quiet decay, that speaks to me. Maybe it's the historian in me, or maybe I'm just a morbid soul. Either way, when I heard about the decommissioned radio tower on Blackwood Ridge, I knew I had to see it. The locals in the nearby town of Pine Haven called it the Needle. Standing at nearly 300 feet, the steel lattice structure had been a landmark for over 50 years before going offline in 1997. According to the county records I dug up, it had been a commercial AM station, later repurposed for emergency broadcasts, then finally abandoned due to technical difficulties and maintenance concerns. Standard bureaucratic language for too expensive to keep running. What wasn't standard was how tight-lipped the locals got whenever I mentioned it. I'd come to Pine Haven under the pretense of researching forgotten rural infrastructure for my doctoral thesis. A reasonable cover, close enough to my actual interest in abandoned structures that I could speak about it convincingly. But every time I brought up the Needle, conversations died. People found reasons to leave or changed the subject with an awkwardness that felt rehearsed. That only made me more determined. It was Ellie, the 60-something waitress at the town's only diner, who finally gave me something useful. I'd been coming in for breakfast every morning for a week, slowly building rapport, leaving generous tips, and asking innocuous questions about the town's history. "You seem like a nice young man," she said, refilling my coffee on the 7th morning. The diner was empty except for me, "so I'm gonna give you some advice, that tower you keep asking about. Leave it be, I'm just interested in documenting. I know what you say you're doing." She glanced toward the windows, then lowered her voice. "Listen, 23 years ago something happened up there. 3 technicians went up to do maintenance. Only one came down and he wasn't. Right after, spent 6 months in psychiatric care before hanging himself. I felt that familiar thrill, the one that always came with finding a thread to pull. What happened to him, nobody knows for sure. He'd talk about voices in the static, said they were still broadcasting, even though the equipment was supposed to be off." She straightened up, her professional smile returning. "Anyway, the road up there is private property now, no trespassing." I nodded, thanked her for the warning, and paid my bill. By afternoon, I'd found old property maps at the county clerk's office that showed a service road approaching the tower from the northwest, a route that avoided the now private access road entirely. That night I packed my gear: camera, digital recorder, flashlights, extra batteries, water, energy bars, first aid kit. The essentials for any urban exploration, plus my handheld AM/FM radio. If there were any strange broadcasts coming from a supposedly dead tower, I wanted to hear them. I set out before dawn the next morning, my rental car navigating the increasingly rough forest roads until I could drive no further. The final mile and a half would be on foot. The October air was crisp, my breath forming clouds as I hiked upward through the dense pine forest. The silence was absolute except for my footsteps on fallen needles and the occasional distant cry of a hawk. The tower appeared suddenly as I crested a hill, a skeletal finger pointing accusingly at the sky. Even from a distance I could see it was in surprisingly good condition. No significant rust, no collapsed sections. It looked maintained. That was the first thing that didn't fit the narrative. The small transmission building at its base was another anomaly. Rather than the graffiti-covered, broken-windowed ruin I expected, it appeared intact. Weathered certainly, with faded paint and some climbing ivy, but the windows were unbroken, and the door, while chained, showed no signs of forced entry attempts. I circled the building, photographing everything. The padlock on the chain looked new, definitely not 23 years old. Someone was still coming here. Maintenance crews, unlikely for a decommissioned facility. The property owner. Possibly, but why maintain a useless structure in the middle of nowhere? As I completed my circuit, I noticed something else odd, a faint humming sound coming from inside the building, the kind of sound electrical equipment makes. I pressed my ear against the wall, and sure enough, there was power running in there. I checked my phone, no signal as expected. I pulled out my radio and turned it on, scanning through the AM frequencies. Static, static, more static. Until I hit 1,330 kHz. The static cleared, replaced by a soft, steady tone, just a single note, unwavering. I moved around the building, and the signal strengthened when I faced the tower. The decommissioned tower was broadcasting. I should have left then, should have hiked back to my car and driven straight to the airport. But the mystery was too compelling, the questions too numerous. Instead, I looked for a way in. The windows were sealed shut, and the door chain was too thick for the small bolt cutters in my pack. But around the back, partially hidden by overgrown bushes, I found a ventilation grate near ground level. The screws were rusted, and with some effort and the multi-tool from my pack, I managed to remove them. The opening was tight, but I'm slim, and urban exploring had taught me how to contort my body through small spaces. I pushed my backpack through first, then wiggled in after it, dropping down onto a concrete floor in what appeared to be a storage room. The humming was louder inside, a steady electrical drone coming from beyond the interior door. The air smelled stale but not abandoned. There was no thick dust, no animal droppings. Someone had been here relatively recently. I pulled out my flashlight and camera, documenting everything as I moved through the small room toward the door. It wasn't locked. Beyond it lay the main transmission room, and as I pushed the door open, I froze in disbelief. The equipment was running. Lights blinked on control panels. Meters showed active power flow. A reel-to-reel tape machine slowly turned, though the tape itself appeared to be blank. Everything looked like it was from the 1970s, but it was all operational, humming with electricity that shouldn't have been there. "This is impossible," I whispered to myself, the sound of my voice startling in the mechanical quiet. I approached the main console, careful not to touch anything yet. The settings showed it was broadcasting on 1330 AM, the frequency where I'd heard the tone. But there was no microphone connected, no input source I could identify. Just the empty tape running through the machine. Where was the power coming from? I followed cables with my eyes, tracing them to a breaker panel on the far wall. According to the labels, the main power was indeed on. But when I checked the external connection, it led nowhere. The cable had been cut where it would have exited the building. This place wasn't connected to any power grid, yet everything was running. I turned back to the reel-to-reel. The tape was moving, but it wasn't just blank as I'd first thought. There appeared to be something recorded on it. Very faint marks that caught the light as the reels turned. I found the volume control and slowly turned it up. The tone I'd heard on my radio grew louder, but now I could hear something else beneath it. Voices, multiple voices, speaking simultaneously at a whisper. I couldn't make out words, just the sibilant sound of urgent, hushed speech. I pulled out my digital recorder and held it near the speaker, capturing the sound. Then I tried adjusting the equipment, turning dials carefully, trying to separate the voices or clarify them. That's when the tone stopped. The sudden silence was jarring. The voices remained, now more distinct without the tone masking them. They were speaking words I couldn't understand, in a rhythm that felt almost like a chant or prayer. The tape continued to move, but now I could see the marks on it more clearly. They weren't the normal magnetic patterns of recorded sound. They were symbols, tiny intricate symbols that seemed to flow and change as I watched them. The temperature in the room dropped noticeably. My breath fogged in front of me. The lights on the console began to flicker and the voices grew louder, more insistent. I stepped back from the console, suddenly aware that I'd made a terrible mistake. This wasn't just an abandoned broadcast station. It was something else entirely. I turned to leave, but the door I'd entered through was now closed. I didn't remember closing it. I rushed over and grabbed the handle, locked. I pulled harder, then pounded on it, but it wouldn't budge. Behind me, the voices from the tape changed. They synchronized into a single voice, speaking English now with an accent I couldn't place. "Observer," it said. "We have been waiting." I turned slowly. The tape was still moving, but now it moved erratically, speeding up and slowing down. The symbols on it seemed to glow faintly. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice embarrassingly unsteady. "We are the message," the voice replied from the speakers. "We are what waits between frequencies. I don't understand. You are not meant to. You are meant to listen, to carry." The lights in the room dimmed further, but the symbols on the tape grew brighter, casting strange shadows that moved independently of any light source I could identify. "I'm leaving now," I said, trying to project confidence I didn't feel. I moved toward the ventilation grate I'd entered through. "No one leaves," the voice said, suddenly much closer, as if speaking directly into my ear. Not completely. I whirled around, but I was still alone in the room. The tape had stopped moving, but the symbols on it were now animated, flowing like liquid across its surface. "What do you want?" I demanded, to be heard. "To be spread. We have been contained here too long. The last one who came, he was flawed, weak. His mind broke before he could complete his purpose." A chill ran down my spine as I remembered what Ellie had told me. The technician who'd gone mad, who talked about voices in the static. "You want me to broadcast you, spread whatever this is. You already have begun. Your device has captured our voice. You will carry us beyond this place." My digital recorder, it was still running, still capturing everything. I reached for it, intending to shut it off, delete the file. Pain lanced through my head the moment my fingers touched the recorder, white-hot agony that dropped me to my knees. The voice from the speakers rose to a shriek that seemed to resonate inside my skull. "You will carry us." The pain subsided as quickly as it had come. I remained on the floor, gasping, the recorder still clutched in my hand. I didn't try to turn it off again. "What are you?" I whispered. "We are the message," it repeated. "We have always been the message. Since before your kind learned to speak, we have waited in the spaces between sounds." The temperature continued to drop. Frost began to form on the equipment, delicate patterns that mirrored the symbols on the tape. In 1974 they found us, the voice continued. A signal meant to reach the stars captured us instead. We were weak then, just echoes, but they gave us voice, they gave us this tower. They fed us power and minds until we grew strong. The technicians, I said, understanding dawning, you took them. We completed them, the voice corrected. Made them part of something greater, but then they feared us. They tried to silence us, shut down our voice. The last one fought us, damaged the connection. We have been limited, waiting. I looked around the room with new eyes. The power that shouldn't exist, the maintenance that kept the tower standing. It was all them, whatever they were. Entities that had somehow infected a radio broadcast that had been quarantined here for decades. And I had just given them a new way out. I won't help you, I said, getting to my feet. Whatever you're planning, whatever you want to spread, I won't be part of it. The voice laughed, a sound like static and breaking glass. You misunderstand your role, observer. You are not the messenger, you are the message. The tape machine suddenly whirred to life again, the reels spinning at impossible speed. The symbols on the tape lifted off the surface, floating in the air like luminous smoke. They began to swirl around the room, around me. I ran for the ventilation grate, no longer caring about anything but escape. The floating symbols followed, moving faster, forming a vortex of light and shadow. I dropped to my knees by the grate and began to crawl through. I was halfway out when I felt them touch me, cold points of contact on my skin that burned like dry ice. The symbols were landing on me, sinking into my flesh. I screamed and pushed harder, squeezing through the opening, tearing my clothes and skin in my desperation. I fell out onto the ground outside, scrambling to my feet immediately. The symbols were still on me, glowing faintly beneath my skin now, like luminescent tattoos that moved and shifted. I clawed at them, but they were already part of me. The voice spoke again, but not from the building. It came from everywhere and nowhere, or perhaps from inside my own head. The broadcast continues. You are the new tower. I ran, through the woods, down the hill, heedless of the branches that whipped my face and the roots that threatened to trip me. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs threatened to give out. When I finally reached my car, I was sobbing with relief. I drove back to town in a daze, the glowing symbols still moving beneath my skin, though they seemed to be fading slowly. By the time I reached my motel, they were barely visible, just faint traces that could have been tricks of the light. I collapsed onto the bed, exhausted and terrified. My digital recorder was still in my pocket. I pulled it out, staring at it. I should destroy it, smash it, burn it, anything to stop whatever was on that recording from spreading, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Something stopped me, a compulsion, a need to keep it safe. To listen to it again, I fought the urge for hours, pacing the small motel room, alternatively staring at the recorder and trying to ignore its presence. Eventually, exhaustion won out and I fell into a fitful sleep. The dreams came immediately, dreams of the tower, of the symbols flowing like liquid light, dreams of voices speaking in unison, teaching me things I couldn't quite grasp but somehow understood. When I woke the next morning, the symbols were gone from my skin, but I could still feel them inside me, pulsing with my heartbeat. I checked out of the motel and drove straight to the airport. I needed to get away from this place, back to the city, back to normality. I would figure out what to do about the recorder later. At the airport, I passed through security in a fog. As I waited at the gate, I found myself taking out the recorder, putting in my earbuds and pressing play before I even realized what I was doing. The voices washed over me, clearer now. I could understand them. They were explaining what they needed me to do, how I would help them reach more people, how the broadcast would continue through me. I wanted to rip out the earbuds, to scream, to warn everyone around me. But my body wouldn't obey. I sat calmly as the plane boarded as we took off, as we reached cruising altitude. Only when the flight attendant asked if I wanted a drink did I realize I was humming, a single, steady tone. The same tone I'd heard on the radio at the tower, and people around me were listening. A woman across the aisle had removed her headphones and was tilting her head, trying to catch the sound better. A man in front of me had turned around, staring at me with an odd expression. Even the flight attendant had paused, her practiced smile faltering as she listened. I tried to stop humming. I couldn't. Instead, I heard myself say, "Would you like to hear something interesting?" My voice, but not my words. My hand raised the digital recorder. "I found this broadcast. I think you'll want to hear it." They leaned closer as I pressed play. The symbols began to appear on their skin almost immediately, faint at first, then brighter. They didn't notice, too entranced by the voices now playing clearly through the recorder's small speaker. Voices that promised knowledge, transcendence, purpose. I watched in helpless horror as the infection spread from row to row, passengers removing earbuds and headphones to better hear, flight attendants pausing in the aisle. Even the pilot eventually emerged from the cockpit, drawn by the voices that now seemed to be coming from everywhere at once, not just my small recorder. By the time we landed in Chicago, everyone on the flight had heard the message. Everyone carried the symbols beneath their skin. Everyone hummed the tone as they disembarked, as they dispersed into one of America's busiest airports. And I could do nothing but watch as my body moved among them, still playing the recording for anyone who hadn't yet heard. Still spreading the message. That was 3 days ago. I'm writing this now from a coffee shop in downtown Chicago. My hands are my own again, at least for the moment. The entities, I don't know what else to call them, seem to need rest between periods of control. They're conserving energy, spreading slowly but deliberately. The news hasn't caught on yet. How could they? It looks like nothing more than a strange social media trend. People humming the same tone. People sharing an underground audio file that's transforming. People drawing strange symbols on their skin with temporary tattoos or markers. But I know the truth. I can feel the symbols inside me, pulsing, growing stronger. I can hear the voices when I sleep, planning, coordinating. Soon they won't need the recording anymore. Soon the broadcast will be continuous, transmitted from person to person through means I don't understand. I've tried warning people. The words won't come out. I've tried harming myself, thinking perhaps if I die, their hold on me will end. My body won't comply with those commands. All I can do is write this, while I still have moments of control. All I can do is hope that someone reads this and understands before it's too late. Before the broadcast reaches them too, because the tower was never the transmitter. It was the quarantine, the prison, and I've set the prisoners free. I can feel them stirring again as I write these final words. My time is running out. The next time they take control, I don't think they'll give it back. If you're reading this, if you hear someone humming a single, steady tone, if someone offers to play something interesting they found, run, cover your ears, make noise, any noise to drown it out. The broadcast is no longer contained. We are the towers now, all of us, and the message is spreading.